Our topic for today is media effects, or it would be better if we say the effect media has on human behavior. Now, when we talk about media consumption with in this day and age is without any doubt a lot. If we speak about the extent to which media affects our behavior in a good way or a bad way, both, this remains debatable. There are many people, or there are many sociological thinkers who claim that the media's effect on our behavior is direct. There are others who believe that it might not be direct, but it does have an indirect effect on our behavior. So, as we start off with this topic, and the name of the topic is, like I said, the effects media has on human behavior. To what extent does media affect our behavior? Now, about this topic, this has been the most popular topic in terms of the unit media, and this has been tested time and again. Now, there are just few questions that I've put in front of you. They're not all, and this isn't an updated list as well. But if you have a look, the amount of questions that you've had on this have been more than the amount of questions you've had on any other single topic. Now, we see that the first question over here, that is the hypodermic syringe model of media influence, has more strengths than the mass manipulation model. Likewise, if we talk about the second question, it reads the media directly influences the way people behave. The third question over here reads media influence is best explained by the uses and gratification model. And we need to evaluate all of these claims because we're talking about answering an evaluative essay question in our CAIs. The fourth one, people who watch violent media will act violently towards others. Evaluate this view. Now, this fourth question and the 11th question that you see highlighted over here in purple, we would be discussing these questions in particular in the next lesson, which would be the last lesson that would cover up the unit media completely. The sixth question over here, the hegemonic model of media influence has more strengths than the mass manipulation model. This was the first question as well. The eighth question, the media are able to control the way people think because they're the main source of information. The ninth question, evaluate the uses and gratification model. The 10th question, the power of the media to shape the way people think has been exaggerated. Question number 12 now, evaluate the hypodermic syringe of media influence. Question number 13, the cultural effects model provides the most convincing explanation of how the media influences behavior. The question number 14, there are many theories of how the media affects human behavior, but all have limitations. Question number 15, existing theories fail to explain adequately how the media influence human behavior. So, like I said, these are a few questions and not all. And while discussing this particular topic, I'd like to divide these different models or these different explanations that help us understand how the media influences our behavior into two main categories. The first we refer to as the first category, we refer to the category that claims that the media has a direct effect on our behavior. And under this category, we study the hypodermic syringe model. And the second category that we have over here is the category that claims that media might not have a very direct impact on our behavior, but indirectly it does affect us or our behavior. And over here, beneath this, we study four different models. Number one, we discuss the two-step flow model, followed by the uses and gratification model, followed by the reception analysis model, followed by the culture effect model. Now, you see how we get questions. I just showed you how we get direct questions on this on a particular model as well. And for this, of course, you need to have a very good understanding on each model. So without any further ado, let's begin. The topic is models of media effect, and I believe by now everyone does have an idea that we would be discussing five models in total, right? So we'd be discussing five models in total. To name them, initially we'd start off with the hypodermic syringe model. Number two, the two-step flow model. The third one would be the uses and gratification model, which is also referred to as an active audience choice model. The fourth one, we discuss the reception analysis model, and the fifth one would be the cultural effect model. So let's take this ahead. In sociology, models are simplified attempts to represent real life social processes. Over the years, a number of competing models of media effects have been developed, offering alternative views of the processes that have been involved. So As I use the word model over here, we're talking about an explanation, or as the book says, a simplified explanation as to how, in specifically, if I talk about this particular model, specific, if I talk about this, if I talk about this specific model, the hypodermic syringe model would explain us how the media has a direct effect on the influence of on the influences of human behavior while influencing human behavior. So let's begin with this. The first model that we have over here is the hypodermic syringe model. Now, what does this word hypodermic syringe model over here mean, or what is this hypodermic syringe model all about? Now, as we speak, or as we use the word the hypodermic syringe model, the idea is that the media is powerful enough that it could impact us directly. It is just like a syringe does. When you're injected with a syringe, or if you're injected with a syringe, you see how the syringe could eventually have a direct effect on you. So, one of the earliest models was the hypodermic syringe model that was developed after the World War One to explain how propaganda messages had affected the morale of enemy soldiers. Now, we're talking about how propaganda messages that propagate something, can affect the morale of enemy soldiers. The model suggested that propaganda worked like a drug that you inject. So, propaganda worked like a drug that you inject, a drug that you inject directly into a vein using a hypodermic syringe, having a direct as well as a powerful effect, on human behavior. So we're talking about the hypodermic syringe model. We're talking about the hypodermic syringe model. And as we speak about the hypodermic syringe model over here, we need to understand, as we speak about the hypodermic syringe model over here, we need to understand that according to this hypodermic syringe model, the idea is that the media has a direct effect on individuals' behavior. Now, this particular model, it wouldn't be wrong to refer to it as a media centric model, a media centric model, or there are many people who also refer to this model as the magic bullet model. So the media centric model or the magic bullet model. So as we speak about this hypodermic syringe model, what the points that I wanted you all to pick on was, this comes under the heading of a direct model. When I use the word direct model over here, the idea, the explanation over here is that media has a direct impact on individual behavior, uh, on a person's, or on an individual's behavior. So if we take this ahead, let's take this ahead. In 1938, when Orson Welles and the Mercury Theatre broadcast a dramatization of H.G. Wells' Wars of the Worlds on the radio in the USA in the format of a news bulletin, and the New York Daily News reported that. Now, what you need to learn from here is the year, the name, that's it. So, in 1938, we're talking about a radio transmission in the USA, and in the format of a news bulletin, and the New York Daily News reported that thousands of people were gripped by mass hysteria, fearful that the earth was being invaded by Martians. It seemed like the theory had been validated. Now, we are talking about how the media could be powerful enough to make us believe in what it wants us to believe in. And not only that, it is powerful enough to actually end up changing the way we behave as well. So the news bulletin and the New York Daily News reported that thousands of people were gripped by a mass hysteria, a fearful that the earth was being invaded by Martians, or the people from Mars. It seemed like the theory had been validated. However, subsequent commentators have queried the New York Daily's news claim. They point that the New York Daily's news report was based largely on anecdotal evidence that was never fully investigated. So, there have been people who have criticized this claim that the New York Daily News made about thousands of people being affected by a false news which they refer to as a mass hysteria, the belief, the idea that Earth was being invaded by people from Mars. Now, the New York Daily News was criticized for this, and the criticism that they faced pointed that this report was based largely on anecdotal evidence. What does the word anecdotal evidence over here mean? When I use the word anecdotal evidence, the idea is when you're providing evidence without any concrete support to it, or when anecdotal evidence, or in other words, is evidence that is not backed through a proper objective research. So the people who criticized the New York Daily News report, they claimed that their report was based on anecdotal evidence and it was not fully investigated, because the local hospitals, of course, if you're talking about thousands of people getting affected, thousands of people experiencing a mass hysteria, don't you think that would result in the local hospitals getting to record some of these cases, if not all, maybe? So local hospitals had no records of hysterical or shock patients being admitted following the broadcast. They also point out that the newspapers were concerned at the time that the relatively new medium of radio could deprive them of some of the advertising revenue. So we're talking about a battle. We're talking about a battle between two different news platforms. The first one was a newspaper, and the newspaper over here felt like it might be replaced, that it felt like it might be replaced by a relatively newer medium. Now, remember when I had initially said keep the year 1938 in your mind. Even if you don't want to learn it, it is okay. Just keep in mind we're talking about something that is nothing less than 80 years ago. So taking this ahead, they also pointed out that the newspapers were concerned at the time that the relatively new medium of radio could deprive them of some of their advertising revenue, and were therefore keen to paint it as irresponsible. So we are talking about a battle, we're talking about a clash between the newspapers and radio, and newspapers, when they report that there were thousands of people who were hysterical, who were shocked, who were anxious, who were depressed, who were stressed over the irresponsible news reporting by the radio. In addition, if hundreds or even tens of thousands really had been gripped by a mass hysteria, it seems likely that this would have been an ongoing story to be explored at length. Yet the newspaper coverage was dropped after a day or two. So the point that we're trying to make over here is, according to Orson Welles, in 1938, there was a propaganda, there was a news that started floating, and this was done so by the New York Daily News. They reported that thousands of people were gripped by a mass hysteria. So, taking this ahead, moving on, uh, yes, I've told you we refer to this as a media centric model. Yes, I've told you we could also use the word magic audience. So, the idea over here is that the media transmits information and the audience react in a broadly predictable way that can be directly attributed to the message received. Audiences therefore are seen as passive receivers. Now I'd want you to learn this word when you talk about the hypodermic syringe model. According to the hypodermic syringe model, they treat, or they tend to assume, that the audiences play a very passive role rather than active interpreters of media message. So this particular model is based on the concept of mass society. Taking this ahead, later researchers have argued that the hypodermic syringe model oversimplifies media effects. Remember, I showed you a 35 mark question on the hypodermic syringe model. Of course, if you get a question on the hypodermic syringe model, you're expected to write, and you expected to write a lot. And because it's an evaluative essay question, you don't just have to write down about the hypodermic syringe model, but it's pretty essential that you understand it real well. So later researchers have argued that the hypodermic syringe model oversimplifies media effects in a number of ways. First, it wrongly assumes that audiences are passive and that audience members are all affected in the same way. You cannot assume, you cannot consider the audience, the viewer, the reader, the listener to be passive, number one. Number two, you cannot assume or you cannot picture them as an atomized mass. What does the word atomized mass over here mean? A view that media audiences are as made up of a very large number of people who lack relationships with others. So we cannot just assume we are, the media cannot, or this model cannot just assume that the media would affect everyone in the same manner. We're not talking about a unified heterogeneous group that would be affected in the same manner. Of course, there are differences. Uh, of course, there are individual differences amongst people. Of course, the way media affects one group might not affect the other group, so on and so forth. Now, taking this ahead, it also pictures the audience as an atomized mass whose response to the media message is unaffected by the social relationships with others. This latter view is challenged by the next model we will look at. And what's this next model over here? The next model is the two-step flow model. So as we start off with this two-step flow model, remember there were 5 models that I said we discussed, 1 down, 4 more to go. So the second model over here is the two-step flow model. What exactly is this two-step flow model? See, try picking on the name as well. The first one was the hypodermic syringe model. You're being injected, media messages are being injected in you just like drugs are injected in individuals. Like the second model that we are starting off with is the two-step flow model. And when I use the word two-step flow model, as the name suggests, 2 steps, if you can flow, if you can pick up something from here. So this two-step flow model, initiated by Katz and Leselsfeld in the year 1955, suggested that personal relationships, this particular model suggested that personal relationships and conversations with significant others, such as your family members, your friends, your teachers, and your work colleagues, result in people modifying or rejecting media messages. Let's do this again. We're talking about the two-step flow model. According to this two-step flow model, sorry, according to this two-step flow model, personal relationships, I repeat, personal relationships and conversations that you have with your significant others, such as your family members, your friends, your colleagues, your teachers, so on and so forth, they can result in people either modifying or even rejecting media messages. So again, the idea over here is that the media message, the idea over here is that the audiences that we are talking about could be in the shape of a reader, listener, viewer. They shouldn't be assumed to be passive, and we shouldn't assume that they live in isolation. They've been all by themselves. Of course, your personal relationships, there is so much that you come across on the media that you might be discussing with your parents, you might be discussing with your friends, you might have, as the word over here says, opinion leaders. So while you're discussing whatever you come across in the media, you might be in a position to modify it, modify the media message, or even reject it. So they argued that opinion leaders, that is, people of influence whom others in a social network look up to and listen. Now, for me, my father could be my opinion leader. For me, my teacher could be my opinion leader. For me, my best friend could be my opinion leader. For me, my older sibling could be my opinion leader. So they argued that opinion leaders, that is, people of influence whom others in a social network look up to and listen to, usually dominate social networks. So if you have an opinion leader in your group, there's a possibility that a particular media message is being discussed in your group, and the opinion leader provides a or negates the news or rejects the news altogether. And because of the power, maybe the charisma, maybe your relationship, you bond with that opinion leader, you might tend to reject that media message altogether. Or another instance, what if the opinion leader does partially agree to it, but modifies it a little? So when and as we speak about the two-step flow model, when and as we speak about this two-step flow model is claiming that the audiences should not be assumed to be playing a passive role while receiving media messages. These opinion leaders, sorry, these opinion leaders, they're people who usually have a strong idea about a range of matters. Moreover, these opinion leaders expose themselves to different types of media. Could be the newspaper, the television news, documentaries, soap operas, or if you want to relate this model to if you want to relate this model to contemporary society or the new media as well. I'm sure while if you come across a post, if you come across something on the new media, could be the internet, Instagram, Twitter, you might go and discuss it with a bunch of friends, and amongst those friends there might be that one friend that everyone listens to, because that one friend we feel, we believe is more informed, has more of exposure than we do. So these interpretations are then passed on to other members of the social circle. So remember, you saw something, you went and discussed it with your friends. There were a bunch of friends who were sitting together. Amongst them, there was an opinion leader. The opinion leader commented on that particular media message. There's a possibility the opinion leader might have agreed to it. There's a possibility that the opinion leader might have modified that media message, or there's a possibility that the opinion leader might have rejected that media message altogether. Now, this interpretation of that opinion leader is then passed on to other members of their social circle as well. Now, taking this ahead, according to Katz and Lesserfeld, thus they suggested that the media messages have to go to two steps, hence the name two-step flow model. Hence the name two-step flow model. Now, taking this ahead, what sort of steps are we talking about? Number one, the opinion leader is exposed to the media content. Number two, those who respect the opinion leader internalize their interpretations of that content. So, I hope this makes sense. Consequently, the media do not directly influence media audiences. Rather, they choose to adopt a particular opinion, attitude, or way of behaving after negotiation and discussion with an opinion leader. The audience, therefore, is not passive but plays an active role in terms of receiving and interpreting and absorbing, maybe internalizing media messages. So, consequently, the media do not directly influence media audiences. Rather, they choose to adopt a particular opinion. Taking this further, clearly, the two-step flow model is itself rather pretty simplistic, because audience members may or may not discuss what they see. Now, if we talk about the flip side of the coin, the two-step flow model does seem better than the hypodermic syringe model. I'm not sure if I should be using the word better over here, but then again, it has its own flaws too. What guarantee do you have that someone who, when they come across something on the media, would go and discuss that very same thing with their opinion leader, or discuss that same thing while having a discussion on a particular group? So clearly, the two-step flow model is itself rather simplistic, because audience members may or may not discuss what they see, read, or hear with others. And even if they do discuss some messages, many messages will go undiscussed. Nevertheless, the general idea that audiences are not passive and that effects are dependent on audiences' social relations with others is now widely accepted. So even if you're not agreeing to everything, you might want to agree to the point that the audience today, we could talk about a media literate audience. A media literate audience, they should not be seen as too naive and passive to be accepting whatever the media wants to show them or ends up showing them. Moving forward, let's talk about this third model, which we refer to as the uses and gratification model. So the model we're talking about over here is the uses and gratification model. And what exactly is this uses and gratification model now? Again, like I said earlier, try understanding the name in itself, the uses and gratification model. Let me repeat, the uses and gratification model. The idea that different audiences use the media for a different purpose. Like you and I, we're right now consuming or using media for academic purposes. Someone might want to use the media to stay informed through listening to news, reading newspapers. Someone might want to use or consume the media and get gratified through it by using social media websites. Someone might consume the media, use the media, seek gratification through the media, through Netflix, a streaming platform. Of course, this model you'd read ahead, or rather, you see it in front of you on the screen. This model was initiated by Blumler and McQuail in the year 1968. I'm aware back then we did not have social media. I was just trying to give you an example so that you help, so that you understand what we're discussing over here better. So the next model, the third model, two down, three more to go. The next or the third model that we have over here is the uses and gratification model. The next model to be developed not only accepted that audiences are active consumers of the media, but turned the basic research question on its head. Instead of asking what the media did to audiences, it asked how the audiences use the media. Now, we're talking about turning the basic research question on its head. Like this says, now we're more interested in knowing what the audiences do or what the user, the end consumer does to the media, instead of merely relying on the idea that it is all that the media does to the consumer. So, according to Blumler and McQuail in the year 1968, they suggest that people use the media in order to satisfy particular needs that they have. According to Blumler and McQuail in the year 1968, they suggest that people use the media in order to satisfy particular needs that they have. They argue that these needs may be biological, psychological, or even social needs. So Blumler and McQuail, they claim that people use the media in order to satisfy their particular needs, using media to be able to satisfy your particular needs. They argue that these needs might be biological, these needs might be psychological, or these needs might also be social. Moreover, these needs are relative. How one person uses the media, seeks gratification out of it, might be different from how someone else uses the media. The way the audience use the media to gratify their needs will depend upon influences such as your social position, your age, your gender, your ethnicity. Of course, the way you consume media, if you have a younger sibling who's 5 years old, the younger sibling might not be interested in using the media in the same manner. The idea that people from different social groups, be it differences in terms of your age, your gender, your ethnicity, your region, your religion, your nationality, your political predisposition, these are some of the factors amongst others, which of course do influence not only your social position, but also the way you use or consume the media. So, for example, Julian Wood in the year 1996 illustrated how teenagers may use horror films to gratify the need for excitement. So, Wood in the year 1996 claimed how, illustrated rather, how exemplified or illustrated how teenagers may use horror films to gratify the need for excitement. Blumler and McQuail identified four basic needs which people use television to satisfy. So we're talking about Blumler and McQuail. The year was 1968. Do not forget this. So taking this ahead, Blumler and McQuail identified four basic needs which people use television to satisfy. Number one, the first one over here is diversion. The second one over here is personal relationship. The third one over here is personal identity. And the fourth one here is surveillance. Let's do this again. The first one over here was diversion. The second one here was personal relationships. The third one here was personal identity, and the fourth one was surveillance. So let's try understanding these four basic needs that Blumler and McQuail felt people use the television for. And the first one is diversion. Watson in the year 2008, James Watson notes we may use the media to escape from routines, to get out from under problems, to ease worries or tensions. People may immerse themselves in particular types of media to make up for the lack of satisfaction at work or in their daily lives. For example, women may compensate for the lack of romance in their marriages by reading Mills and Boone romantic novels. Some people even live alternative lives and identities as avatars on websites such as Socialife. So you have an example from traditional media, and then you have an example from the new media as well. So based on this idea that was put forward by Blumler and McQuail in the year 1968, the first way through which individuals or media audiences they seek satisfaction is through diversion. We spoke about how Watson feels many people use the media to escape from their routines or to try to make up for the lack of satisfaction they have either at work, their social life, or their daily life. Number two, personal relationships. Watson notes that we often know more about characters in soap operas than we do about our own neighbors. The media may, therefore, provide the means to compensate for the decline of community in our lives. So, the decline for community in our life. We today, in this day and age, we're living in a we're all self-oriented, goal-oriented, career-oriented, too busy with our own lives. According to Watson, people today might know more about the characters in any particular, let's just say, Netflix series or the soap operas than they do about their own neighbors. The media may therefore provide the means to compensate, for the decline of community in our lives. For example, socially isolated elderly people may see soap opera characters as companions they can identify with and worry about in the absence of interaction with family members. So, elderly people, when they're retired, when let's just say they don't have their partner anymore, the partner passed away, they're just alone. They know that the kids today are going through that age and phase of their lives where they want to focus or dedicate more time to their profession and careers. They see their grandchildren being too busy with their gadgets and their own life. This is when these elderly people could compensate for the absence of interactions with their family members by keeping themselves occupied with the media or through soap operas. Users may also see cyber communities on the web as alternative families, like minded people. If you're talking about, I mean, there could be many, many examples. There are so many communities on the internet based on the game you play, based on your interests, based on your hobbies, based uh, on things to do, places to go to, your interest in pets, any academic forum, so on and so forth. Number three, personal identity. People may use the media to make over or to modify their identity. People use the media to make over or to modify your identity, personal identity. For example, a teenager who suspects he is gay may use the experience of a gay character in a teenage soap opera, such as Hollyoaks or Skins, to help him make decision about how he might deal with his own sexuality. Social networking websites such as the Facebook and Instagram allow people to use the media to present their preferred identity to the wider world. So this could help individuals develop or test or experiment a personal identity that they're maybe longing for, or that they're no, it might not be easy for them to live with that identity in real life. Number four, surveillance. As we speak about surveillance over here, people use the media to obtain information and news about the social world in order to help them make up their minds on particular issues. We're talking about surveillance over here. People use the media to obtain information and news about the social world in order to help them make up their mind on particular issues. Now, these particular issues could be anything from, let's just say, the recent American presidential elections in 2024 to the uh, American president and the Ukrainian president, the clash, the disputes over or the conflicts. It could be anything, right? So media helps you stay informed. In recent years, the gratification of this need is increasingly taking on an interactive quality with the growing popularity of online blogging and websites to which people can add their own knowledge, for example, through Wikipedia. And again, I feel Wikipedia is, there are many other platforms that exist today, which provide individuals with an opportunity, with a better opportunity to satisfy, to gratify their need for surveillance. So taking this ahead, we're still discussing the uses and gratification model. That is the third model. Okay. Later researchers have used this approach to establish that people may use the media to satisfy a wide range of needs. For example, James Lull in the year 1995 found that members of families use television to satisfy their sometimes somewhat contradictory needs for communication with each other, affiliation, social learning, and demonstration of competence. Read this again. Later researchers have used this approach. I'm sorry. So later researchers have used this approach to establish that people may use the media to satisfy a wide range of needs. For example, James Lull in the year 1995 found that members of families use television to satisfy their sometimes somewhat contradictory needs for communication. So we're talking about how Lull in the year 1995 claimed that members of some families use television to satisfy their need for communication with each other, affiliation, social learning, and demonstration of competence as well. For avoidance and dominance, for example, taking control of the remote control, now you or your generation might not really be able to relate to this, but there was a time when back in the days, back in the 90s, having control over the remote control, the television remote control, actually did matter, so among siblings at least. So recognition of the fact that audiences seek to satisfy particular needs as consumers of media is a useful reminder. So, understanding, accepting, validating, recognizing the fact that audiences seek to satisfy particular needs as consumers of media is a useful reminder that audiences are not passive, but tells us nothing about possible effects. So, the next model to be developed sought to understand better how the media of an active audience might modify the impact of media messages. So now we're talking about, now this particular model, the uses and gratification model, as you must have felt or noted, that this model had more to say about, or had more to do with how us as an audience, as a viewer, as a listener, as a reader, or as a as a user of a particular application, what we do to the media and not what the media does to us. So the next model that we would be discussing over here, the reception analysis model. This reception analysis model would help us understand how the audience actively modifies the impact of media messages. So three down, two more to go. And the fourth one here is the reception analysis model. If we speak about this reception analysis model, the reception analysis model identifies a number of ways in which audiences are active in terms of their reception of media messages. The reception analysis model, understand the name, focus on the name, focus on the title, the reception analysis model. This sounds like, this looks like, this has to do with the way audiences receive media messages. Now, when we speak about the reception analysis model, this model identifies a number of ways in which audiences are active in terms of reception of media messages. Now, in particular, they draw attention to different processes. Now, we're talking about the reception analysis model, and this reception analysis model claims how the audiences have an active role to play in terms of receiving media messages. The way audiences receive a particular media message, they play a very active role in that. Taking this ahead, we'd speak about selective exposure, we'd speak about selective interpretation, and we'd speak about selective recall. Now, in order to understand this reception analysis model, let's discuss, or let's briefly discuss what selective exposure is. Audience or media users, they select which media message they would get exposed to. I mean, it's on your discretion. The newspaper you want to read, if you even want to read a newspaper or not, what particular television program would you be interested in watching. So when we use, or as we talk about selective exposure, we are talking about the extent. As we talk about selective exposure, we're talking about the extent to which the media plays the extent to which the audiences play an active role in terms of choosing what sort of media platform would they want to have exposure to, choosing what particular sort of what sort of newspaper they want to use, what sort of newspaper they want to read, what sort of television channel would they want to consume, or what sort of application would they want to use. I've seen many students talking about Instagram and less talking about TikTok. So you're very selective and choosy about deciding what sort of media would you want to have exposure to and what not, and which ones you wouldn't want to. Number two, we speak about selective interpretation. Now, what does this word selective interpretation over here mean? Audience members do not necessarily simply absorb unquestioningly the messages they receive, but they may challenge them. Selective interpretation, the extent to which audience members absorb the media message. You're very selective about what you'd want to accept that you come across. You might not want to accept whatever you come across through the media, or whatever you're exposed to through the media that you've chosen. Remember, we discussed the point selective exposure. You wouldn't necessarily not question it. Many of you might be more media literate, as the term we use, than others. So as we speak about selective interpretation, audience members do not necessarily simply absorb unquestioningly the messages they receive, but they may challenge them. Number three, selective recall. Audience members may forget information that does not fit in with their pre-existing worldviews. So not only do you decide what sort of media would you want to get yourself exposed to, you also decide how to interpret the particular media message you've received. And at the same time, you very selectively recall whatever you want to recall. You very selectively keep in mind, or you very selectively, uh, you very selectively, you very selectively care about what you feel is right. You very selectively uh, absorb the information or accept the information or recall the information that fits into your own pre-existing worldview. And at the same time, you might let go of something that you did not agree to. So we were discussing the reception analysis model. As we speak about this reception analysis model, we spoke about the different ways that, or the different ways or the different aspects that the reception analysis model brings our attention to, which play an important role in terms of our understanding of the extent to which media can affect human behavior. Of course, media can only affect human behavior. Media can only affect our behavior once we choose to get exposed to it. Of course, after choosing to get exposed to a particular platform or a particular, let's just call it a particular platform, we very selectively interpret. And when we're interpreting things, we're interpreting them according to our own pre-existing worldview. We only retain what we want to retain. The issue of selective interpretation has received particular attention from researchers. The key assumption these researchers have made is that media messages are polysemic. That is, they carry many multiple meanings. For the ones who do not know what the word polysemic over here means, in this context, it means the media might be carrying many potential meanings when it comes to their content. To put it another way, the media messages are open to different interpretations. The reception analysis model, there's a classic study we have that we can use as an example if we want to use this point in our answer. So, the reception analysis model suggests that the way people interpret media content differs according to their social class, their age, their gender, their ethnic group, and other sources of social identity. I mean, there are many more. Your your political predisposition, your profession, your culture, your educational background, your interests, the sports, maybe. So, the reception analysis model suggests that the way people interpret media content differs according to their social class, the age, the gender, the ethnic group, so on and so forth. David Morley, in the year 1980, examined how the content of a well-known 1970s BBC evening news program nationwide. So David Morley, like I use the word, a classic researcher reference that we've been teaching for almost 2 decades now. So this research that was conducted by Morley, he examined how the content of a well-known 1970s BBC evening news program, and the name of the program was Nationwide, was interpreted by 29 groups made up of people from a range of social, cultural, and educational backgrounds. So we're talking about a famous evening news program, and the name of this program was Nationwide. We're talking about how different individuals from from a range of social, cultural, and educational backgrounds, how they interpreted whatever they came across on that particular evening news program that was transmitted on BBC. Members of these groups took part in an in-depth discussion following the viewing of one of the two extracts. One was about a strike action taken by a group of workers. The other was about the budget plans of the government. So one was about strike actions. The second one was about budget plans of the government in order to see how they had decoded the preferred interpretation of events offered by the program makers. Now, if I put it in a simple manner, does everyone interpret whatever they come across on the media in the same manner? We're talking about two extracts. One was about strike action taken by a group of workers. When workers they call for a strike when they don't want to work till the demands are met. And the second one was about a budget plan of the government. Now, taking this ahead, in order to see how they had decoded the preferred interpretation, Morley concluded that people chose to make one of the three readings or interpretations of the media content. Number one, preferred reading, which we'd also preferred reading, or which was also referred, which could also be referred to as the dominant reading, where the viewer shares the program's code, that is, its meaning system of values, attitudes, beliefs, and assumptions. This was the reading associated with, for example, a group of bank managers, print management trainees, apprentices, and school students. So when the viewer shares the program's code, or in other words, when the viewer, the listener, the reader, in this case we're using the word read viewer over here, because remember this was a television program, evening television program. So when the viewer's ideas are similar to the ideas of the program producer, this we refer to as preferred reading. Or in other words, if I may give an example here, this book that you have in front of you on the screen right now as well, if you read a paragraph and you actually do interpret it, or you give meaning to it the way the author while writing the book wanted you to give meaning to it. So with that we refer to as preferred or dominant reading. Number two, negotiated reading. Now, what does the word negotiated reading over here mean? As we use the word negotiated reading, this is when the viewer partly shares the program's code and broadly accepts the preferred reading. See, the word negotiated, of course, shows flexibility. So, negotiated reading, when the reader or the viewer, in this case, sorry, the viewer partly shares the programmer's code and broadly accepts the preferred reading, but modifies it in a way that reflects their social position and interest. So, when you're partly agreeing to whatever the program producer wants you to uh, partly agreeing to the way the program producer wanted you to interpret it in, and partly you're not. You're partly not agreeing and you're modifying that message in a way that it reflects your own social position and your own interests. This was the reading associated with, for example, teacher training college students, university art students, and photography higher education students. Number three, oppositional reading. The viewer does not share the program's code and rejects the preferred reading, bringing to bear an alternative frame of interpretation. This was the reading associated with a group of shop stewards. Now, who are shop stewards? They're trade union members who are elected as representatives of a shop or department in dealing with the management. So, when you use the word shop stewards, you're talking about trade unions. Taking this ahead, from this, David Morley concluded that different group of individuals from a different background might interpret the media message in a different manner. So remember, reception analysis model. Moreover, Morley argued that social class alone did not determine how a group interpreted the program. People within the same social class could belong to distinct subcultures within the class and consequently read the program extracts differently. For example, the apprentice group and shop steward groups were both working class, but as indicated above, they read the extracts differently. So this group and this group, despite of the fact that they both belonged to the working class, you saw how they interpreted the media message in a different manner. You could see the difference. even when both of them belonged to the working class. Now, moving on. Overall, then the reception analysis model argues that audience members actively interpret media messages according to their pre existing attitudes, values, beliefs, and social position. Chris Livesey in the year 2014 has suggested that models such as this which focus on how media messages are filtered by audience groups can be referred to collectively as normative models. So we are giving another name to the reception analysis model. Keep this in mind. We're referring to we're referring to the reception analysis model over here as the normative model. Why the word normative model? Read this again and you'd understand. Livesey in the year 2014 has suggested that models such as this, which focus on how media messages are filtered by audience groups, can be referred to collectively as normative models, reflecting the emphasis given to the importance of understanding how the norms and values of audience members may influence the way media messages are interpreted and applied. So the idea over here is that by and large, the norms, values, or the attitudes held by this group compared to this group compared to this group might be different. So the ones that are highlighted over here in green, I'm talking about this one, there's a possibility that they might have had the same, they might be carrying the same value system. They might be believing, their beliefs might be pretty similar. So hence the word normative. Normative, my dear, comes from the word norm. For them, there'd be the norms. The norms of these might be different from the norms of these. The values of these might be different from the values of these. Taking this ahead, normative model reflecting the emphasis given to the importance of understanding how the norms and values of audience members may influence the way media messages are interpreted and at the same time applied. Having said that, let's move on towards the last model that we'll be discussing today, which is the cultural effects model. Remember, right at the beginning, I'd said there are 5 models that we'd be discussing today. So we're down with 4 already, and we are about to begin understanding or trying to understand the 5th model, which we would refer to as the cultural effects model. This cultural effects model, it is but a short step from the reception analysis model to the conclusion that media have little real effect on audiences because the latter interpret what they see, hear, or read according to the pre-existing views, attitudes, and opinions. However, such a step has been challenged by a range of media sociologists. So, we're talking about the cultural effects model. As we speak about the cultural effects model, the as we speak about the cultural effects model, the idea over here is that the media influences people gradually over time. See, we spoke about the reception analysis model before this, right? So according to the reception analysis model, I'm talking about, oh, I'll just zoom this part only. So now understand what I'm saying here, right? So if we speak about the reception analysis model, according to the reception analysis model, individuals from different social groups, they carry their own norms, they have their own pre-existing views, and these pre-existing views that they carry, they affect the way they interpret a particular media message. However, when we speak about this cultural effects model, according to this cultural effect model, like I said, it suggests that the media influences people gradually over time. It is the media that, with time, understand what I'm saying. It's the media that, with time, shapes individuals' attitudes, their values, their beliefs, their opinions, and according to the cultural effect model, this is a slow process, which is also referred to as the drip drip effect. See, drip drip effect, a drop of water every time eventually would make a difference. So This is also referred to as the drip effect model, which believes that the media does have its impact, but this impact is a slow impact and has and after going through a long term process, it eventually does affect the way individuals individuals are influenced by the media. So, and this, I don't think I need to remind you, but this is in total contrast to the hypodermic syringe model, which believes that the media has a direct and a very immediate effect. Remember, we'd use the word media bullet. So, according to this cultural effect model, media messages are built up over time. They reinforce dominant ideas in society. This is also called the drip model because there's a small repeatedly, slowly, and gradually, the media keeps on telling you something to the point that you start believing in it. Now, it is but a short step from the reception analysis model to the conclusion that media have little real effect on audiences because the latter interpret what they see, hear, or read according to the pre-existing views, attitudes, and opinions. However, such a step has been challenged by a range of media sociologists who insist that the fact that audiences are active does not preclude or prevent the possibility that the media can have significant effects on both their attitudes as well as their behavior. Now, in relation to the reception analysis model, they pose the question as to where these pre existing ideas come from and query or question whether it is plausible to suggest that the media have played a part in their formation. They also ask what happens when audience members have no direct experience or other knowledge of an issue. For example, Greg Philo in the year 2001 notes that when he and his colleagues began their examination of media coverage of the Gulf War in 1991, we're talking about a reference, a sociological research. According to Greg Philo in the year 2001, he notes that when he and his colleagues began their examination of media coverage of the Gulf War of 1991, it was clear that the public knowledge about the background to this conflict was low, meaning that media outlets were in a stronger position to instruct their audience. So, if you're talking about a situation when the public does not know much about any particular issue, this puts the media into a stronger position so that they're able to instruct their audiences or they are able to manipulate their audiences. Left wing sociologists, in particular, are critical of the models which suggest that the media are ineffectual. Kitzinger, Jenny Kitzinger of the Glasgow University Media Group argues that many of the terms widely used in media or cultural studies obscure vital processes in the operation of the media power. Concepts such as polysemy, resistance, and the active audience are often used to bypass or even negate inquiry into the effects of cinema, press, or televisual representations. Our work shows that the complex process of reception and consumption mediate, but do not necessarily undermine media power. Acknowledging that audiences can be active does not mean that the media are ineffectual. Recognizing the role of interpretation does not invalidate the concept of influence. Now, I'd explain this to you, but before that, I'd want you all to read this twice and see what understanding of this do you have or how do you understand this. Once you're done reading, I'll give you a minute and then I'd explain this to you as well. Now, I hope we're all done reading this. So let's read this again. Many of the terms widely used in media cultural studies obscure vital processes in the operation of media power. Concepts such as polysemy, resistance, and the active audience are often used to bypass or even negate inquiry into the effects of cinema, press, or televisual representations. Our work shows that the complex processes of reception and consumption mediate, but do not necessarily undermine media power. Acknowledging that audiences can be active does not mean that the media are ineffectual. Recognizing the role of interpretation does not invalidate the concept of influence, says Sue Kitzinger in the year 1999. Now, let me explain this to you. What Kitzin's is trying to explain, or he argues that even though audiences interpret media in different ways, media still has power and influence. Some concepts in the media studies, such as, if you remember, we had the word that you see written over here, polysemy or resistance. These are some concepts that are used in media studies where polysemy means multiple meanings, resistance means challenging media messages, and active audiences, where we talk about the people making their own interpretations, or the viewer, the listener, the consumer, the reader, the consumer makes his or her own interpretations. Now, these media concepts such as polysemy, resistance, and active audiences, they make it seem like the media has very little control over people's thoughts. However, this might not be true. So, according to the cultural effect model, this might not be true. Just because people interpret messages in different ways does not mean the media has no effect at all. For example, if a news channel constantly portrays a certain group negatively, some people might resist this message, but over time, repeated exposure would eventually influence the public opinion on that particular social group or on that particular group. Now, this links this paragraph that we see over here. This is, of course, we're studying it under the heading of cultural effect model, which suggests that media influences society slowly over time, shaping people's views without them even realizing it. In short, audiences are active, but media power still exists. Interpretation does not cancel out media influence. So remember, when we were discussing the reception analysis model, we had spoken about how the way audiences interpret a media message is important. So, according to what you see on the screen right now, interpretation is of important, but you cannot negate or you cannot totally nullify the idea that over time, media, I mean, there's so much, there are so many examples that I could give you. If you are a Pakistani, the views that the media has been shown, the local media has been showing you all on the Kashmir issue, that has helped you form an opinion. If you're an Indian, you'd have, the media has shown you stuff that over the years has made you not like Pakistan, or the views that are held by different media that are portrayed or that are held by, they're portrayed, or the different views or the way the Palestine issue, the Israel issue is portrayed in the, is represented in the media. Slowly and gradually over the passage of time, according to the cultural effect model, this eventually does end up making a difference. Now, taking this ahead, the neo-Marxist cultural effects model argue that over the long term, constant exposure to the media results in the internalization of an ideology which portrays capitalism as both natural and inevitable, and in recent decades portrays neoliberal policies as the interests of all. Neoliberalism, of course, competition, marketization forces, less of intervention by the government, allowing businesses to make a lot of money. So yeah, for example, they argue that in the UK and the USA, media coverage of benefit fraud in recent years has resulted in the demonization of welfare claimants. So, to the point that people have, because over these years, people have been shown, the media has shown the welfare claimants to be bad, them to be fraud, for them to be frauds, for them to be dependent, for them to causing for them to be causing trouble for the country's economy. So the people, because the way the media has portrayed them over these years, this has resulted in the demonization of welfare claimants and the undermining of public support for the welfare state. So all of this has happened over the years. Ben Bongberg, Kate Pell, and Declan Gaffney in the year 2012 examined a database of national daily newspapers in Britain from 1995 to 2011 and located about 6,600 articles concerned with benefits and working age claimants. They found an extraordinary disproportionate focus on benefit fraud, with 29% of news stories referencing fraud over this time period, despite the fact that the Department of Work and Pensions' own estimate of fraud across all benefits is only 0.7%. Look at what the real figure is, look at how the media has been portraying it. Moreover, the reporting of benefit fraud often makes up often makes use of sensationalism in order to provoke a this makes use of sensationalism to in order to provoke a strong negative emotional reaction in the reader. So this being there, if we quickly wrap up this topic now, the authors also conducted focus groups and commissioned a MORI survey. Now, this MORI survey, this is one of the best known survey organizations in the UK. It carries out research studies in the areas of certain social and public policy. It covers a lot of topics, including sports, culture, health, science, education, crime, employment, so on and so forth. So the authors also conducted focus groups and commissioned a MORI survey of public opinion to examine public attitudes towards benefit claimants. The survey asked respondents to estimate the proportion of claimants that were fraudulent. Their estimate was 1 in 4, a proportion pretty much in line with the proportion of the newspapers about the benefits that focused on fraud. The hypothesis that the newspapers were largely responsible for these estimates is further strengthened by the findings that there was a strong relationship between the amount of news coverage of fraud in particular newspapers and the estimates provided by the readers of those titles. So, again, people believed in what the newspapers were showing them, what the media was showing them, which was different from how the numbers were in reality. Let's conclude this real quick and bring this topic to an end. So if we conclude this, nearly the issue of media effects is, clearly, not nearly. Clearly, the issue of media effects is one of which divides sociologists and other social scientists. Perhaps this is unsurprising given the difficulty of isolating the effects of the media from other possible influences and given the complexity of the possible effects, short-term or could be long-term, direct or could be indirect, intended or could be unintended on the individual, groups, and the society as a whole. Now, let me explain this to you. When you talk about the effects media has, how sure could you be that it is just the media that has been affecting your behavior? There are so many other factors, and you, of course, cannot isolate media's effect. I mean, you cannot keep everything else constant and then try figuring this out, which might not be very easy for you. One. Number two, when we talk about the possible influences that the media has or the possible impact that the media has on individual behavior, what does the word impact mean over here? The word impact could have a different meaning for me as compared to the meaning that you carry for it. Are we talking about a short-term impact or are we talking about a long-term impact? Are we talking about a direct impact or are we talking about an indirect impact? Are we talking about an intended impact or are we talking about an unintended impact? More so, when you use the word media, remember, if you're playing a video game, let's just say if you talk about PlayStation 5, that is an example of media. And again, if you talk about reading a book, let's just say a novel or any fiction book, that's an example of media too. You do realize how a game is media, a video game is media, and so is a book. And I feel the only similarity or the similarity that I can think of right now that they hold amongst each other is just the name media. A book makes you read in a particular direction. If you're playing a game, you do things your way. And that's just one example. All I'm trying to explain you over here is that when you're sitting for your paper 4, that is P4, uh, in your A2 sociology exam. P4, you get a 35 mark question. You'd get a 35 mark question on media as well. You'd get 2 questions. You'd have an option of attempting any one question. Remember, for every 35 mark question, the assessment objectives, knowledge and understanding, for knowledge and understanding, you have 9 marks. For interpretation and application, you have 11 marks that are dedicated. However, for evaluation and analysis, you have 15 marks dedicated. Learn how to evaluate. Work towards improving your analytical skills. Now, I'd share a document with you all that would help you evaluate answers on media even better. But for now, one way of evaluating these competing models is to examine an area of social life which has been extensively researched: the relationship between the media, crime, and deviance. Now, like I had mentioned right at the beginning, when I'd showed and pinpointed two questions that were highlighted in purple, I'd said there's this tiny topic that I mean, it's a part of this. It's a, let's just say, it's a part 2 for this, which we would inshallah hopefully cover uh in the next lesson. For now, I hope this has been helpful. Thank you.